Hello, everybody, and this is a new session for our brain-friendly channel. And in these sessions, we tend to select amazing speakers, coaches, leadership experts, people that have to do with neuroscience and can shed a light into how we live our lives and how to work more effectively and learn new tools along the way. Today, I have Sally Grisdale from California, although today you are in the UK. And welcome, Sally. How are you today?
I'm great. How are you, Sylvia?
I'm very well, very well. It's a privilege to have someone like you in our channel, and I'm so excited about the conversation we are going to have because you specialize in helping people discover their mission, particularly creative people. Is that correct?
Yes, that's right. That's my background, creative design.
Okay. So you have an amazing career. You have been the former chief design officer for Apple and Yahoo and Facebook, amongst other companies. So tell us a little bit about your background because we want to know exactly what took you to this place.
Well, if we wind back in time, I didn't do very well at school. My brain was absolutely unable to tell a story in a structured manner. And I ended up learning how to type. I got a job. I met a boy who did theatre. I made posters. I did a graphic design certification. I got a degree in graphic design. I ended up at the Royal College of Art. And Apple talent spotted me. And when I was 28, I was flown to California, United States to join Apple's then research group. So that was quite an interesting 10 years from 18 to 28 to go from being an academic failure to this, creative person who was being valued by this amazing company. And I stayed there as a real hotshot, designer, immigrant, didn't know anyone, must have created lots of neural pathways, the whole experience, not having community there, learning how to drive, learning how to set up a bank account, the whole thing. And I stayed in California working in Silicon Valley for various big corporate companies like Apple, like Yahoo, like Meta, formerly Facebook. And rode the corporate career from individual contributor to manager to leader to senior leader. And I, just to correct you, I was only chief design officer at one company, not at all those companies. And in 2018, I left the corporate world. I was in a very high stress executive role at Meta at the time and experiencing something called menopause, which really debilitated my ability to hold and focus and be really in the moment and adding value. So I moved on. But I had a coach, and I've worked with a coach for many years, and it was her who said, "You've always been a coach leader. Why don't you become a coach?" And that's what I did, and that's what I've been doing ever since.
That's an amazing career and a great story. And congratulations for taking, this leap, which is not an easy leap to take. And I guess that, self-doubt and how am I going to do this has crept into your mind.
Yes, many times. I think feeling like an imposter is something that is in my DNA. I just keep showing up in places where, certainly from my background growing up in England, in the countryside, very rural, very, very normal. It's a big change.
So what have you discovered along the way in terms of a girl from the English countryside that didn't do very well academically, but you have this amazing talent in other areas or amazing different type of intelligences, and you have put them to work. And how did this happen? Like, what thoughts did you have along the way? How did you overcome these little challenges or big challenges and obstacles?
Wow, gosh, there've been so many. I think the first time the big change happened was when I was sitting in an office in Reading, Berkshire, when I was in my late teens typing. And I didn't find it terribly interesting. And I didn't imagine my life going this way. And when I found myself within a year later walking into a design school, and someone told me I could make a living doing art and design, I grabbed it with every fiber of my being. So I think for me, I haven't always known what I wanted to do, but I experienced the stuff I did not want to do, and I will move as anything to, find a better way.
Okay. And what would you say to a parent of a child like you?
Oh my gosh. I have no idea. I've never been a parent. I've always been just my family has very much been the people and the community, the creative community, and now more recently the business and coaching community around me. I'm not sure what I don't ever really feel qualified to give advice, to be honest, on the kind of relationship parental front. And that's also perhaps why I've had the freedom and the time to invest in self-development of myself as a leader, as a creative thought leader and coach.
So when you're coaching creatives in your current profession, what type of issues do you find that people come to you with?
That's a great question. I mean, I work primarily with the kinds of people I used to work with. So they might be a design director or a vice president. They've got responsibility for teams of other creative people, researchers, content providers. And they're successful people. They're often mid-career, aspiring to late career, who have reached a point where the tools that they made them so successful aren't cutting it for them now. So they're discovering, for example, value misalignment. They've got the accolades, they've got the titles, they've got young children, they're married, they've got the house, they're such massive achievers, and yet they're feeling somehow diminished in their capacity to really enjoy what they're doing. For me personally, I experienced this as well. I loved being a creative individual at Apple. Who wouldn't, But as my success led me to management and then leadership, my ability to succeed just completely fell off because I didn't have the tools or the experience. And then I think another thing that drives people is fear of conflict, because as creative peoples, we have dexterity in creating artifacts to advance the narrative of how something will come into being. Maybe it's a product. And that gives us exposure to a lot more people. We get out of our comfort zone of working with our immediate peer group. And so leadership is a full contact sport. Conflict is embedded in that. And myself included, that was something I was not ready for. And even if it's not conflict, it's a way of languaging, a way of communicating that if creative people are very much inclusive and relational in the way they approach their work, the business side may be much more strategic, much more action oriented. And so when I started learning about the two sides of the brain, the task positive network being very focused versus the default mode network, the right side being more creative and visioning, it started to just validate and help me understand why there are conflicts in industry, because people are coming at their job with very different mindsets. Another thing, people
different mindsets and different brains, how they operate. Yeah,
exactly. Another thing is imposter syndrome. A lot of successful people find themselves in new roles, and they're moving from perhaps project-based work where they have a bit more personal control to influence. Suddenly you've got maybe 3 remote teams around the world, and you can't be there standing over them and, you know, second guessing. You have to understand how to influence. And then to be really an effective leader, you have to actually leave your team alone and go and relate to what's happening upstairs and across, and bring that influence back into your organization. And that can be a very, very hard step for someone from a creative background to fearlessly go and do, because the results are not obvious. If you spend a lifetime making artifacts and suddenly you're saying, no, your artifact is to go and talk to people, it can feel very unsuccessful.
Yeah.
I think there's 2 more things people come for, which is one, just raw ambition. Quite often people say, I need to be a chief design officer by the time I'm 45. How do we get there? And that's just good, healthy, you know. And the last thing, which is sort of an umbrella, I think if there's just one thing, it's stress. Because in these big companies, particularly today, with the numbers of layoffs, leaders particularly are really getting it in the neck. They're doing the work. They were already doing the work of 2 to 3 people. They've just had to lay off their group. If they keep their job, they're doing the work of 4 or 5 people. A lot of my existing high power clients are having a hard time showing up for coaching right now, just because of the volume of what's being thrown at them. And stress, as you know, is literally a killer. And now, through learning a little bit about, I'm a generalist, I'm no specialist, and I'm not a scientist, but learning about the chemistry of the brain, I can understand now, and I can see where people are completely overstressed or overstimulated to the point where they're shutting down. And so I know the kinds of right coaching to do. Or if they're understimulated, bored, and they're just pulling a paycheck and they're hating life, you know, and they need to change. That's a different type of coaching.
Yeah. Wow, so much going on. And, you know, between the great resignation and all these layoffs that we recently have been encountering, what's the solution? What's the systemic solution? What do people and organizations need to learn to cut this cycle? Because this is not healthy for anyone.
No, it's really not. It's a really great question. You're putting a coach on the spot there. I'm a coach in part because I think the kinds of skills that creative people have are a really good tonic to some of the issues and challenges that you're just describing. And it's in part that ability to hold and do both divergent thinking and convergent thinking. And it's the process where it's often been known as design thinking, where you start with an idea, you can expand on it, see how far you can take it, you get feedback, you test it, and then you adjust and take the design back and iterate it. And it's this convergence expansion that is innate, I think, in creatives, that naturally is, you know, crossing over the TPN and the DM. Oh, I always get the name wrong. The DMT, the network, you know, and that ability to hold a big picture whilst dropping into tasks, I think, is a way of being in the world that's incredibly valuable. It's much more flexible. It's much more inclusive. It is very task oriented. There is always an output, but it's very much centered on the customer, the person who's going to use this thing that we're creating in the end. And I think the frustration a lot of designers have is they're marginalized, they're minimized because their output is not as tangible as, say, a salesperson who has to reach certain targets. And that's always a conflict with creatives working in the business field, is how to get that visibility and that credibility. And that's what really motivates me. I was so privileged to have a moment to be a chief design officer and have that creative autonomy. And it just felt so right. And that's why I do what I do. I want to help people really not be afraid of being that powerful. Your average, you know, extrovert business leader wouldn't even think about this. But for a creative person, their power comes from their output. So you take that away from them and say, and now you need to sit next to that executive and hold your own and be more powerful. Helping someone get there to really understand that inner leader, to accept how powerful they are and their authority, it's like, it's amazing, you know. And you know, having gone through it myself, it's very meaningful to be able to work with people to help them on their journey. Yeah.
You seem to be doing amazing work, and which is a very essential work that people need to tap into, and they need the world needs more coaches like you, because we have to walk away from goals being the only thing that matters into the combination of goals and inspiration, because we know that people want to find meaning and purpose in their jobs. But if we keep them focused on the linear aspects and achieving the task and achieving the goals, it's not enough. People get either bored or they leave the organization and set up their own business. And we also need to be able to nurture their heart. And creatives are very connected to their hearts. And what they do is very important. So it's really interesting how different you are in terms of, you know, looking at the coaching approach versus other coaches that sometimes I speak with. And when it comes to neuroscience and how you have applied the knowledge of the brain, we had a chat before, and you mentioned you learned a variety of things that were very helpful in your coaching approach. Could you share with us maybe one or two things that are important for people to know?
Absolutely. I mean, after Facebook and the whole, you know, menopausal brain fog and stepping into the coaching world, I took the coactive training, and I didn't know at the time, but it's very informed by neuroscience. They have faculty like Anne Betts, who works in the field of neuroscience. They had an early CEO, Shazad Kameen, who looks at brain flexibility and saboteurs. That's a big part of. So suddenly getting this blueprint for how to work with people just allowed me to feel much more confident about testing this material I was learning at coaches school. I mean, remember, I just spent 30 years in business in Silicon Valley, pulling a paycheck. And here I was suddenly as an entrepreneur working from home saying, trust me, I'm a coach. So I learned about neuroscience through Coaches Rising, which was a podcast that interviews a lot of neuroscientists. And it was rather like you're doing your own program. You have a brain science program coming out in August, isn't that right?
That's right. It's called the Neurobiology of Coaching and Wellbeing and Brain-Friendly Practices.
Yeah.
So we are very excited about this upcoming program.
I took Neuroscience of Change in 2019, and I think the thing that I learned that informed my real understanding of why I was doing this through coaching was the understanding of the prefrontal cortex and its ability to respond to stimulus. So I know your audience will know this, but it's sort of like a horseshoe that's upside down, where if you have too little stimulus, the chemicals like dopamine and norepinephrine are much less than if they are overstimulated. With too much stimulation, you get stress. With too little, you get a different kind of stress. So this idea of the Goldilocks of the brain, of finding the sweet point.
Not too little. Yeah, exactly.
And so knowing that, I could now look at my coaching tools and say, okay, well, what if this person is completely overstimulated and completely emotional? Then let's find a name for that emotion. Let's pull in something like the feelings wheel. And I did a little very tiny quick video of this when COVID hit. So many tools already exist. And that's what I love about being a coach at this point in my life. I've got such a rich toolkit.
Yes.
So naming emotions, it takes, if you can name and say, I'm slightly scared, emotional, and feeling vulnerable. Whew, you know, it takes the
The
emotion out
pressure.
of it.
Yes.
Yeah. And that brings you present to the moment. And then all those tools we know about, like yoga and meditation, that bring you present to the moment. There's also reframing. If your mind is stuck in one direction, let's say I ask you to, I don't know what room you're in right now, but if I were to ask you to count the number of things you see in the room that are green.
I can
Let's
see
see
one.
it. Okay, there's one thing. I've got a lot because I got a lot of books here with green on the back. But now if I ask you how many things in the room are red, you couldn't tell me because you were looking through that one lens of green. And so being able to reframe and help people move around their brain, connecting the left and the right again by changing perspective. In coaching, we call it balance. I think in neuroscience, we call it not reframing, but something close to that. And I think I was taught to sort of help people to literally cross the river, imagine like a river down the brain, or almost like an orchestra. Ann Betts describes it as having an orchestra and being able, you know, over one side you've got the bass notes and the timpani and the strings, and over on the right you've got the violins and the flutes and the wind instruments, and it's that ability to have them all present but not necessarily playing at the same time. So reframing, being present, and then also reminding people of their values. And this is something that comes up a lot for successful people in their 40s, and not just creatives. They've reached that moment where they did what their mom and dad told them. They did what was expected of them. They exceed even their own expectations. And now they're looking at that moment in their life and going, I work for this mad CEO. The board love me. They know I'm keeping the wheels on his bus. What the heck am I doing this for? This is treading on my values, and the values are the behaviors and the things that make us who we are. And by that point in our lives, we've probably established what's most important to us. So if you're in a company or an organization that's just like day in, day out, feels like walking into a room where everyone's smoking and you don't smoke, yeah, you have to start thinking about what's next.
Yeah. And it's interesting because 40, 30, I don't know when it was, about
Yeah.
cigarette, that we said we are not smoking in public or in cafeterias or in airplanes, and someone made a decision about that. Now the new cigarette is to have a culture that is toxic, or to have a boss that elevates our cortisol levels just by being around them, and nobody is calling it. That's why we talk a lot about brain-friendly culture. So if we were more educated about the needs of the brain and how the brain needs to survive, not just the African savannah, but the office in today's workplaces, we will be able to stop certain behaviors that do not help create a brain-friendly workplace. And I think that by bringing this knowledge that you have acquired into your coaching session, that starts to change the collective awareness, and people are able to defend certain positions. So if someone is suffering from high levels of stress, why do I have to suffer the stress of someone else? And it is like being with someone that smokes in our face. Same thing.
Yeah. And I think sorry, go ahead.
No, keep going.
No, I was just going to say, sometimes when companies want to bring in coaching, it's after the fact. And if a culture is toxic, that's not a good reason for having coaching. To cover your ass prior to firing someone, for example, I've seen coaching used that way. Or you can't coach someone if they're in a toxic environment. They just, honestly, they have to leave.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Coaching, I think, where companies do get it right, and there are many of them, is when they understand that their biggest expense is their people, and the most expensive people are their leaders. So why not, invest in helping them become the leader that they need in that company? Why not invest in the people who've already grown and continue to grow? it creates loyalty, it creates the next generation of leaders, it builds your brand, because those people then can attract amazing talent. I've always been very, very lucky because of those early fumbles in my academia landed me into two of the, a couple of organizations that gave me currency to attract and hire really good people. So yeah, I think coaching is a missed opportunity for many companies to really build their leadership bench strength.
Yeah. And I was about to ask you the next question, which is, how do we persuade these people who hold the budgets that coaching is a learning opportunity and it's a way to avoid losing great talent because they go to the next company or the company next door, and that is an investment in people. You may get the money back from this person, or maybe someone else comes to occupy that role and they have already been coached. So how do we create this sense of abundance instead of cutting costs and coaching is not worth it, or we don't have the money for coaching or for training or whatever this takes shape?
That's a great point. I mean, the one thing about humanity is it only changes for one or two reasons. Something terrible happens, or a teacher comes along to show you a different path. This is true in business. This is true in life. This is true as an individual. I only change under pressure. We're like little diamonds, that start as carbon and we form under pressure. So you can't approach a company whilst it's thriving because they might bring in coaching, but hopefully it's not a situation of extremis that will cause someone to bring in coaching. I think what's great about the proliferation of coaches, it's becoming mainstream, not in this country, not in England, which is interesting, but it is becoming much more of a tool that senior leaders, particularly director level and above, are adding into their toolkit along with their meditation practice and their yoga and their drinking matcha or whatever is making and helping them. I don't know. I'm not interested, to be honest, in working back in corporate. I've done my time. I have worked for a few small startups as an in-house coach, but it's not a model I really love, because by the time they pick up the phone, they're in a state of extremis, in crisis, and they want coaching to get them out of a hole. And it's not that I'm not interested in helping someone out of a hole, but I'm actually much more I'm more valuable working with the next generation of leaders so that they can create an organization where people don't fall into holes, or if they do, they have the tools to climb out.
Okay. So what you're saying is highly valuable. And if I was someone who is in the space of UX design, or if I was a creative, I'm thinking, I want to be coached by Sally. Where can people find you? And do you engage directly with individuals, or how does it work?
Yeah, I talk to people all the time. I have a website. It's my name, sallygrisdale.com. And you can book a half-hour complimentary coaching strategy call with me. Or you could join my newsletter. I'm just setting that up. Or even just have a look at the website as a simple, calling card on the web. I am also on LinkedIn under my name, Sally Grisdale, have been since about 2006 when it first started. So you can find me there.
Great. That sounds fantastic. And anyone who is thinking, I really need help with my mission, my values, my purpose, or how to integrate my brain, my left and right brain, and also benefit from your experience in corporate, particularly in Silicon Valley, definitely should reach out to you. We believe we have this motto saying that better brains create better leaders. So the more educated you are when it comes to the brain, the better position you will be to do your job. So we are not our job. We are human beings that then do a job. And it's so important to learn about ourselves in how to optimize, this amazing organ that we all have. And you have also written some interesting articles. I was reading one in particular where 75% of teams are dysfunctional, particularly cross working teams. So tell us a little bit about what you do when you find that there's so much dysfunction and people can't come together to achieve the outcome they want.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, modern technology is very fast paced, it's evolving very quickly, and it's bringing together people from all over the world with different skill sets, with different perspectives. When I started my career, I might work with an engineer and another designer, maybe a business partner. Today, I would need to work with the legal team, the marketing communications team, the business folks, the front-end engineers, the back-end engineers, the customer service team, the data analysis, the content strategy, the user research. I mean, the list, it's just
Long and long.
mind-blowing. And I, I think I think we need to find ways to learn how to relate to people in a non-threatening, non-frightening way, because clearly the idea of the loudest voice in the room wins is not going to survive in this era where it takes, they used to say it takes a village to raise a child. It literally takes a village to raise a technology these days.
Yeah. And one of the things that we forget, Sally, is that the brain is not that different to what it was thousands and thousands years ago. And we are asked to do so much more with less resources, without that village that contains us emotionally. And that puts us in a very vulnerable position. I have clients that feel completely overwhelmed by the complexity of everything, and they don't take any time for themselves to recover from day to day, and that puts them under a lot of stress, which is not the best way to live. So coaching is one tool that anyone can use, and there's nothing wrong with having a coach. In fact, we should have many different coaches that can help us train ourselves in different aspects of life. And we also need to tap into the collective consciousness that we all need to help each other, rather than getting defensive or fighting, or this dysfunction that exists in organizations. So it's not a simple thing to solve, but we need to reach out when we feel that we are not hitting the mark, or we don't feel well. So yeah, so what would your final words be when it comes to someone that is listening, and if they're feeling some anxiety, so they're feeling a bit depressed, what would you say to them?
Gosh, I think Dan Siegel, who's a neuroscience expert, says it the best. He says the mind is not the brain. The mind is an embodied and relational process regulating the flow of energy and information. I grew up thinking that my brain was this big 7-pound thing I carried around, and the rest of me wasn't really that important. But the truth is, we have brain matter in all of our body, and the ability to get embodied, to be present in the moment, is the best medicine for self-acceptance, self-authority, and to own who you are. You are unique, you are creative, you are resourceful, and you are whole, and you will always be. And yeah, that's what I want to say. The mind is not the brain.
Thank you. That's Daniel Siegel is great indeed. And when you understand this distinction and can do things to help the organ itself to function better, and then you work on your mind and how your relationship is with others, definitely you are in a better path to find yourself if you lose yourself for a while.
Yes.
So I appreciate your time today. It's been a wonderful experience talking with you, Sally. And once again, for anyone who needs, a coach, and particularly someone that understands that creative mind, reach out to Sally Greistel. And it's been a total privilege talking with you and meeting you. Thank you, Sally.
Thank you, Sylvia. Likewise. You're amazing.
Thank you, darling.